Even the village chief thought his son could tame Joy. "She won't dare lay a hand on my boy," he boasted. But Joy was no respecter of titles. When the chief's son tried to charm her, she punched him so hard he lost 2 teeth. The chief could only watch in silent rage as his son returned home, face swollen and bleeding. A long time ago, in the small village of Asa, there lived a girl named Joy. She was the most beautiful girl anyone had ever seen. Her bright eyes sparkled like stars, and her skin was as smooth as silk. People couldn't help but stop and stare when she walked by. But behind her stunning beauty was a force to be reckoned with. Joy wasn't like the other girls in the village. She never smiled, she never laughed, and most importantly, she never let any man get close to her. Joy didn't just avoid men, she terrified them. Any man who dared to approach her faced her wrath. Some ended up with bruises, others with black eyes, but all knew one thing for certain: crossing Joy was a mistake you wouldn't want to make twice. One day, Joy made her way to the village market. The sun was high, and the bustling crowd made the market a noisy place. But when Joy entered, a hush seemed to follow her, as if her presence alone commanded silence. As she picked up vegetables, a young man, lost in thought, accidentally bumped into her. Without a second's hesitation, Joy's hand flew through the air, slap, the sound echoed through the market, and everything went still. The man's face reddened as he stumbled back in shock. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry," he cried, bowing his head in terror before running off as fast as he could. The market resumed its usual buzz, but whispers spread quickly. "She did it again," the women murmured, shaking their heads. No one dared to challenge Joy's anger. Her beauty was admired from afar, but her fury kept everyone at bay. Despite the fear she inspired, many men still sought to marry Joy. They were captivated by her beauty and believed they could change her. One by one, the men brought gifts, sweet words, and promises of love to her doorstep. But Joy wasn't swayed. When a man got too close, she would beat him until he could no longer stand. Bruised and humiliated, they left her house, knowing their efforts were in vain. Even the village chief thought his son could tame Joy. "She won't dare lay a hand on my boy," he boasted. But Joy was no respecter of titles. When the chief's son tried to charm her, she punched him so hard he lost 2 teeth. The chief could only watch in silent rage as his son returned home, face swollen and bleeding. The village was troubled by Joy's behavior, and the elders decided to confront her. They called for her to appear in the village square. The crowd gathered in curiosity, wondering what would happen when the fierce girl faced the wise men of Asa. Joy arrived, her head held high, her expression as cold as ever. The elders sat in a circle and began asking her questions. "Why do you hate men, Joy?" one elder asked. "Why do you beat every suitor that comes your way?" Joy's face remained unreadable. Her voice, calm yet firm, rang out, "I will never let a man control me, and I will never stop fighting them." The villagers gasped at her boldness. The elders, confused and troubled, asked, "But why? What happened to make you this way?" Joy stood in silence, refusing to answer. With no choice, the elders let her go, but their curiosity only deepened. On a hot afternoon, Joy went to the stream to fetch water. The path was uneven, and as she walked, she slipped on a rock, falling hard to the ground. Her pot broke, and she injured her foot, making it difficult for her to stand. A nearby farmer saw her fall and rushed to help. He knelt beside her and began to tend to her wounded foot. But Joy, ever suspicious, mistook his kindness for an attack. Her fist shot out, hitting the farmer square in the face. "Don't you dare touch me," she shouted, her eyes blazing with anger. The poor farmer, holding his bruised face, tried to explain, but Joy refused to listen. He limped away quietly, his body aching, leaving Joy standing by the stream. Despite her fearsome reputation, Joy's beauty caught the attention of the village prince. He admired her strength and independence, convinced that no other woman in the village compared to her. The prince began visiting Joy, bringing her gifts of fine clothes, fruits, and rare jewelry. Joy accepted the gifts, but she remained distant. The villagers couldn't believe it. Will the prince be the one to change her? They whispered. One day, the prince invited Joy for a walk by the stream. The air was cool, and the water flowed gently. Feeling confident, the prince made a mistake. He reached out to hold Joy's hand. To him, it was a simple, affectionate gesture. But to Joy, it felt like an attempt to control her. Her fury exploded. She punched the prince in the chest. Another blow to his face. The prince's guards rushed to his aid, but Joy's strength was unmatched. By the time they reached him, the prince was on the ground, bruised and bleeding. When the prince returned to the palace, battered and bruised, the king was furious. "Who did this?" he demanded. Word spread quickly, and soon the entire village knew that Joy had beaten the prince. The king summoned her to the palace, and once again, the villagers gathered to witness what would happen. Joy entered the palace courtyard, her head high, unafraid. The king, glaring from his throne, demanded answers. "Why did you attack my son?" he roared. Joy stood in silence, her face as cold as ever. The king's anger grew. "Speak, girl, or face the consequences," he shouted. Finally, Joy's strong, fierce exterior began to crumble. Her eyes softened, and for the first time, the villagers saw something different. With tears in her eyes, Joy began to speak. "My father, he wasn't kind," she said, her voice trembling. "He beat my mother every day. Treated her like nothing." The villagers listened in silence as Joy told the story she had kept hidden for so long. She spoke of the abuse her mother had suffered and how, one terrible day, her father's rage caused her mother to lose a child, and soon after, her own life. "I was just a child," Joy whispered, "and I watched her die." After her father's death, Joy went to live with her uncles, hoping for peace. But what she found was even worse. Her uncles were cruel, treating the women in their lives with the same brutality her father had shown. Joy saw it all, the mistreatment, the disrespect, the violence. It was in those moments that Joy made a vow. She promised herself that no man would ever hurt her the way her father had hurt her mother. She would protect herself, no matter what it took. As Joy's painful story unfolded, the villagers were silent. The men who had once admired her beauty or feared her strength now lowered their heads in shame. They realized that Joy's fierce nature had been born from deep pain and loss. The women of the village, who had silently carried their own struggles, began to see Joy differently. She wasn't just a fighter, she was a symbol of strength, a protector of herself and, in many ways, all the women who had suffered in silence. The king, hearing Joy's story, was moved. He realized that her actions weren't born out of cruelty but of a deep desire to protect herself from a world that had wronged her. "No man in Asa shall ever treat a woman badly again," the king declared, his voice firm. He punished Joy's uncles for their cruelty, ensuring that no woman in the village would ever suffer as Joy's mother had. From that day on, the village of Asa changed. The men who had once feared or admired Joy from afar now respected her as a protector. And the women, who had lived in silence, found a voice through Joy's strength. Joy herself softened, not because she had been tamed, but because the village finally understood her. No longer was she the feared beauty of Asa, she was a warrior, a survivor, and a symbol of resilience. The prince, humbled by Joy's strength and story, offered her a sincere apology. "I'm sorry for trying to change you," he said, bowing his head in respect. Joy, for the first time, allowed herself to forgive. She knew now that not all men were like her father or uncles. Some could change, some could respect, and some could understand.